Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, as appeared in the agenda, Director Gacki's comments are off the record. We'll transition to a panel which will be on the record. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panel topic here. We'll be examining the latest developments in North Korean cybercriminal activities with a group of leading experts from the think tank, government, and private sectors. Alex O'Neill, the co-founder and lead of the Korea Project's North Korea Cyber Working Group, will be moderating panel 3. If I could ask the members of the panel to make their way up and have a seat, that would be great. Alex's work focuses on North Korean financially motivated cyber operations, as well as links between North Korean and Russian-speaking criminals. Currently, he's focusing on mixers, some of the topics that Director Gacki was mentioning for his latest research. His key Harvard research publication is Cyber Criminal Statecraft, North Korean Hackers' Ties to the Global Underground. Alex holds a master's in Russian and East European Studies from the University of Oxford and a BA in History, and it pains me to say this, from Yale University. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, John. Well, thanks, John, for those kind words, and thank you, Director Gacki. That really insightful keynote. Good afternoon, everyone. Like John said, I'm Alex O'Neill. I'm a researcher with the Korea Project. I co-lead our North Korea Cyber Work Group and service coordinator this project. I have the impossible task today of following David Sanger and Francesca Giovannini, who did an excellent job of moderating our previous 2 days. We have a really fascinating discussion to wrap up this one today. We've got an outstanding group of panelists here. And without further ado, let me introduce them all one by one. And then we'll dive right in. So going in alphabetical order, down at the end, we've got Nick Carlsen, blockchain intelligence analyst at TRM Labs and a former intelligence analyst at the FBI. Welcome, Nick. Good to see you. We've got Ashley Chafin-Lomonosov, who's a DPRK cybercrimes expert at Chainalysis. Previously worked in the US government. Welcome, Ashley. We have Professor Kim Won-soo, a chair professor at Kyung-hee University, and former Undersecretary General and High Representative for Sovereign Affairs at the United Nations. We have Dr. Kim So-jeong, a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy, as well as an advisor on science and technology to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the Korea-US Cybersecurity Working Group that Director Gacki mentioned previously. So welcome to you both. To my immediate right, we have Priscilla Moriuchi, who's a fellow here at the Korea Project, who was formerly the Enduring Threat Manager and top expert on East Asian and Pacific cyber threats at the National Security Agency, as well as at the, thank you, as well as at Recorded Future. And then finally at the end, he needs no introduction, but Dr. John Park, the director of the Korea Project, who's done lots of pioneering research on DPRK cyber threats and on illicit finance. So welcome to all, great to have you all here. Ashley, same question to you on a key development report on North Korean cybercriminal activities that caught your eye and why it concerned you.
Why it concerned me. First things first, thank you for the DeFi risk assessment. I think that was long overdue and much appreciated by the industry and global financial system writ large. So that was phenomenal. And though that doesn't specifically point fingers at North Korea, it perhaps may as well have, because DPRK did in 2022 steal $1.7 billion worth of crypto, and that's just what's published. To your point, what most recently caught my eye, was most interesting to me, was Mandian actually graduating Kimsuki to an advanced persistent threat and deeming it worthy to join that club, and that really points to exactly what we are missing, right? Because we only know so much about that. And while the malware analysts at Mandian are excellent, we don't have that kind of attribution. And because victims aren't always forthcoming and would prefer to maintain great press and, great customer relations, we don't always have that data too. So I think that in part just concerned with ransomware and malware alone speaks to exactly what we're missing, and then some.
Professor Kim, same question to you on development.
Yes, thank you. But before doing it, because this is the first time I address this Belfer Center meeting, I must say 3 thanks. First, John Park and your staff at Belfer Center, and President Kim and his delegation from Korea Foundation, and last thanks to all the experts around this table, and I think I may be the only talker, not the real doer. So I was very impressed by reading the reports most of you have contributed, and I'm really impressed by the work you have done, and I think you deserve a lot of applause from us. Back to your question, I'm deeply concerned by the long-term trend because when I left the UN 2017, 5 years ago, I never expected North Korea's capacity to grow like this. The trajectory of they are picking up, to me, really perplexing. and I think Koreans may have very good genes at innovation. South Koreans using it for peaceful, commercial, benevolent purposes. And our brothers in the North are using it opposite ways. But the methods they are using it are very innovative, I found, and really troubling to me. And here, I can notice there are some sort of unholy trinity of conditions which are conducive to further attacks with much worse consequences in the future. Because first of all, somehow they have acquired capacity and they are keeping up with the trends of state-of-the-art technologies. Not only in cyber, but also artificial intelligence, and even, I'm afraid, it may spill over to other technologies like quantum computing. So they have capacity. Secondly, they have motivation, because they are now experiencing triple troubles: self-imposed, COVID-related, very stringent restrictions on top of the international sanctions, as Director mentioned, and their economic system failures. But they need cash. They need revenues somewhere. So they have motivation. And digital economy provides very fertile playing ground for them. And it is amazing to see they were able to build human talents out of the hermit kingdom, where 99.9% of ordinary people even don't have internet access. But now they building up an army of IT workers they sent abroad, but also top-class cyber hackers in the world. So they have capacity, they have motivation, they have very fertile playing ground. So we have to expect the worst is likely to come. And we have to be prepared for that. So that long-term trend really troubles me.
Thank you for those remarks. I think you raise a lot of interesting points, and we're going to dive into all three of those different components over the course of the panel. But if we could go next to Dr. Kim for a report that caught your eye.
Hi, this is Susan Kim, and thanks for the Jeong and the Korea Foundation too. And it's for me, I'm using usually studied the cybersecurity policies in South Korea, and I never expected it to talk here like international security studies and sanctions, and then the real practitioners at the same time about the North Korean and their cyber activities. It is so interesting for me, and I'm very excited. Regarding the worriness, I worry a lot of things because they have capacity and motivations and fertile environments, and they are unpredictable. So I'm not sure what we can do something for the resilience or responses. What can be the best solutions? I'm not sure about that. So that is my worry, really. They are spreading their targets, the cyber attacks going to everywhere for all over the world. And they are doing every methods to do the bad things. And then they are targeting not only the critical infrastructures, but also all the ordinary environment to get the revenues. So we cannot deal the North Korean cyber activity not anymore as our problem, but it became the world's problem. So I'm not sure I can make any scenarios for the responses. I cannot expect what they were going to do the next. So that is my worry, the first one. So maybe the other way, I can say a little bit in detail later, but the worry goes that way. Thank you.
I can tell this is going to be a really upbeat panel. Nick, over to you for developments or reports that have caught your eye and that are concerning.
Yeah,
Maybe it's the question that's concerning.
I'm a contrarian by nature, and my kind of take is I'm kind of frightened by the lack of reporting, right? The lack of North Korean spectacular hacks. I think every time you see a big hack, the immediate thought, right, is, oh, it's another North Korean job. But the most recent ones, I don't think that's true, right? Like Euler Finance, that was not North Korea. And so the lull makes me wonder, what are they up to? Because they're not sitting on their laurels, right? They're planning something. And I wonder what that might be. I have my own concerns that, I think the response internationally from the United States, South Korea, and private industry to hacks like Ronin and Harmony Bridge, and the, effective clawing back of decent amounts of money stolen in those hacks has maybe taught the North Koreans that they actually should target less spectacular things because that brings such scrutiny. And there's a fertile market out there for much less high-profile things like scams that they absolutely could perpetrate. There's lots of money still in the industry floating around waiting for the next project. As you see, Crypto GPT, which is seemingly an outright scam, just raised an enormous amount of money. So I think that's potentially a more fruitful venue for them, and I worry that they might make that shift.
We're going to circle back in a little bit on those sort of lessons learned and then how to adapt on our end. But John, over to you for the same question on developments or reports that have caught your eye.
First off, it's terrific to be on this panel. Many members here, you've been such great mentors to our students and to myself as well. And this is a rapidly evolving space, and you've all been very generous with your time and insights with the Working with the Career Project. I'd like to give a very brief genesis story. My colleague and good friend down the road at MIT, Jim Walsh, and I did a 3-year study looking at how the North Korean regime accumulated learning in evading sanction, particularly the regime's elite state trading companies, what we eventually called North Korea Incorporated. In tracking that accumulated learning and looking at how sanctions in some of the areas created unintended consequences of creating more market opportunities for North Korean elements, essentially members of North Korea Incorporated as they're deployed in Southeast Asia, other markets in Asia. As we track that, there's an evolution of it. And I think a bridge to the question that Alex posed, North Korea Incorporated has gone virtual. And the two things that I'm worried about is really under the heading of a growing phenomenon. One is the increasing use of spear phishing and tapping into social anxiety. And so for North Korean cyber criminals to be able to access calendars and emails and case joints and observe participants' behaviors, in this environment of anxiety about layoffs, budget cuts, VCs pulling back on funding, to simply say in an email, there's a budget meeting coming up, here's the updated numbers, quickly assess what your team has to cut for the meeting. Things along those lines, people are going to, for a moment, suspend this notion of, does this look fishy? Because it taps into this pre-existing anxiety. And I think this is growing, and this is one part of it that it's not surprising that it's spear phishing, that's well documented, but it's this frequency that is increasing. The second thing is the reports that came out, particularly of North Korean engineers posing as engineers of other nationalities, and at a time when companies were hiring, doing these webinar and Zoom interviews and whatnot. And as Nick mentioned, we know of this because of individuals, VC interviewing or portfolio company side interviewing, not feeling quite right in reporting it. But as Nick mentioned, what of all the others that went through and were hired and were given access to servers and other functions within these companies? So that's the part that I also share Nick's concerns. And I would wrap up with the greatest concern, if thematically, if we were to look at it, it's the North Korean cyber criminals' tacit knowledge. It's the learning by doing. And that part, there are many, many opportunities to do so. Back to you.
Thanks, John. So you all flagged a number of really important angles on this issue, and we'll dive into many of them over the course of the panel. But we've been speaking about
some of the sort of negative developments and the concerning developments that had happened. And I wanted to ask, maybe on the more positive side, what are some of the approaches and measures that remain effective to this day? I wonder if we could start with Nick on this question, but major sanctions efforts that remain effective at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be an America-centric perspective, right? But the legal framework that was built out in 2016 and 17 with NIXPIA and CATSA, those two laws basically established all the legal authority that any U.S. agency needs to properly enforce a really rigid and strict sanctions regime against North Korea. But with sanctions, right, it's always not the authority, it's the implementation. And, you know, from my own time in government, there's obviously more that we can be doing. We can be much more effective. And I just hope, right, that strategic focus isn't being lost, that we are thinking proactively, looking forward to more effective ways that we can kind of not just, name and shame, right, but actually dismantle and disrupt these organizations. And I think, I guess I'm going negative. There's a sense, right, that we don't have that clarity, that we're very passive, we're very defensive, and I would like to see, more aggressive actions that are taken, not in response, but preempting what they're doing.
Dr. Kim, if we could ask you the same question. In your opinion, what sanctions measures remain effective at this point?
Actually, I should be negative again. So sorry.
I'm trying my best.
But actually, I've been spent 20 years in here, and I've heard of the word sanction itself in like recent 3 years. So the other 17 years, I never thought about the sanction kind of things to respond to North Korean cyber activities, because the Korea, for the ordinary citizens, is not very familiar with those kind of sanctions. So I heard the sanctions on the news about the UN kind of things and the nuclear things, not about the cyber things. So there is no relationships for me to sanction and the North Korean cyber activities. So it was my first time to think about it. And then next question was, what impacts or effectiveness can be done by those sanctions? Because whenever we do some sanctions, we expect some kind of redirection of bad actors, or shrinking, or expanding, or going somewhere, some other places. But again, the North Korean keep doing, and they are never stopping, and they are just expanding the whole cyber attack toward all over the world. So those kind of effectiveness can be a little bit differently understood by myself in Korea. So I cannot say very positive about the sanctions and effectiveness, sorry, but still, it gives some good chances for the business service providers or the regulators to think about how then we can do something toward that one. So in Korea, we have some kind of some government official documents toward the reacting the North Korean cyber activities in 2009, 2011, and 13, 15. We do a lot of regulatory things, but those items were only about the reactions or preparing the things, not about the sanctions or the aftermath things about. So then we always, again, think about how we can improve our measures, something to react or to respond, then not thing happening again. So kind of we raises the awareness about the resiliency or the hygiene concepts into the cybersecurity things again. So that is my answer.
So I just have a follow-up question, Dr. Kim. Are there particular measures or sort of changes in the approach you think that we could take to be more proactive as opposed to reactive, as you mentioned?
It started to, because now Korean government wanted to renew our national cybersecurity strategy. Maybe it will be published in June or July, I guess. And they are thinking about a little bit more proactive and a little bit active defense can be applied into our conceptions of the action items. So it changed a little bit in that way.
Thank you. Professor Kim, the same question to you. What approaches or sanctions effort remain effective at this point in time?
From my UN experience, I can share the skepticism about the effectiveness of sanctions. It's true. Many sanctions are put on a number of countries, but not many of them get desired effect. But that said, some sanctions are effective, and sanctions UN put on North Korea are the most comprehensive and most stringent I ever see at the UN. So there was a lot of talk at UN circles how we have to make sanctions regime in general more effective. So, as John suggested, it should be targeted. Secondly, it should be smart, minimizing what Dr. Kim said, minimizing collateral damage, particularly humanitarian impact, let alone on the companies. But still, in my view, sanctions are needed because they make our planned operation or planning execution of any illicit activities more difficult. And also, it pushes up transaction costs because plan of any illicit activities have to pay more money to any intermediaries involved due to higher risk arising from sanctions. So still, I see the utility of sanctions, but I think we have to sharpen the use of it to make it more targeted and smarter. And also, sanctions itself is not an end. It's the means to achieve a greater political purpose. And sanctions must be complemented by diplomacy. Because we have to build coalition of the countries who are ready and willing to implement the sanctions. If some countries keep maybe one eye or two eyes aside, as if they don't see, while violations of sanctions are occurring. So we need diplomacy to convince as many partners as possible to implement it. Because the worst case of sanctions is sanctions are put in place but not implemented. It's the worst kind of sanctions because then it will embolden and it will set in the culture of impunity and it will embolden the perpetrators. So once we put sanctions, we have to make it smart, effective, really working.
It's a really interesting point, but if I could follow up with you for just a minute. From your UN perspective and from your experience in terms of sharpening the sanctions and tailoring them, is it more challenging to sanction cyber actors as opposed to physical world politicians and traitors and perpetrators of violence?
Absolutely. Because cyber crimes are invisible and almost impossible to trace. And also perpetrators, very easy for them to deny. So challenges are much greater in sanctions in the cyberspace.
Sure. Yeah, Dr. Kim, go ahead.
Actually, at the UNGC discussions during when 15, 14, there's some discussions. Maybe we can have some kind of establishment entities or organizations to deal with the cyber bad activities. But right after that, the technician just said that who we're going to verify that one. So and everybody can deny their bad habits and bad activities, and who we're going to verify it, and who we're going to secure the transparency of the whole processes of those kind of entity or organizations. Then the discussion goes anywhere. So that's why maybe Professor Kim said that the sanctions cannot be in a good way in the cybersecurity, and it will be better, much harder than the physical world is.
Definitely. And it sounds, to Professor Kim's point as well, it sounds like a key part of that is the coalition building of finding enough countries with the know-how and the willingness to actually go ahead with the sanctions. Ashley, I wanted to ask you the sort of flip side of this question. Which of our approaches have become less effective, or our tools have become less effective in combating North Korean cybercriminal activities?
Alex, I had a positive response for you. And now you're making me totally change course.
We can do both if you'd like.
Positively speaking, while I do have all of the same sentiments as the rest of the panel, the Office of Foreign Assets Control's persistence has really played a key role in enforcement. And beyond that, sanctions are only as good as they are enforced. But beyond that, just education. By being so persistent and consistently updating the SDN list, more people are paying attention. And all it takes is one tiny little thread to pull before a company, a small business, realizes that they have a huge problem. So there's my note of positivity for the night. It was the only one I had for you. I'm sorry. Would you mind restating the question, Alex?
Sure. On the negative side, measures or tools of ours that have become less effective in countering North Korean cybercriminal activities.
I really hate getting both ends of this because I'm going to absolutely contradict what I just said. So because the Office of Foreign Assets Control has been so persistent, they have, especially concerning the cryptocurrency space, my realm, they've knocked out all of the predictability. So sanctioning Blender was phenomenal, except for the fact that we knew what they were doing on the other side of Blender. Generally speaking, those funds can be traced because all cryptocurrency is traceable. So by shutting down Blender, they had to pivot, which means that we had to pivot and we had to get smart fast, or we lose visibility of all those funds. Tornado Cash was the same thing. It's a different realm, decentralized finance. You can't really shut it down, but we do have to pivot, and that did cause a momentary pause. So when sanctions are enforced, when services are shut down, when businesses are blocked out of the US and global financial system, that's phenomenal, except for when it gets in the way of our investigations. So sanctions are phenomenal, especially for education, but they hurt us sometimes in terms of our ability to act on DPRK's or act against DPRK's activity.
It's a really interesting point. It sounds like there's a sort of light touch of kind of finding that balance of when to sanction, when to develop more stringent regulations, and when not to.
Right,
for
and
intelligence
relatively
purposes.
speaking, especially in terms of sanctions, this is such a new space that we haven't had the best case success story yet. We haven't had the worst case success story yet either, or the opposite of success, but I don't want to call it a failure, but we haven't had enough experience to say what works and should be repeated and what doesn't and should never be repeated.
I think it's a really important point. Ashley, do you see it the same way in terms of who is sort of best suited to take the lead in countering these kinds of activities?
Absolutely, especially as it pertains to sharing information. It is easiest to treat it as a national security threat, but then also handle it at a law enforcement level. So being able to act is one thing, right? And we've seen that even recently. A European law enforcement group took down one of DPRK's other favorite mixers or methods for obfuscating their blockchain activity. And that's great, right? Super impactful. And that's the flashy show that everyone loves. But that was also backed by a deep intelligence gathering operation and a network of very smart people and individuals working to make that happen. So yes, chip mixer's gone. That's great. But that only happened because we've developed, again, internet crime, a pattern of success for that. So I think that will be where we get to. I think it'll just take some time.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Kim, the same question to you. Based on your experience, especially at the UN, who do you think is best suited to tackle these kinds of problems? Is it law enforcement, intelligence, someone else?
It should be everyone. Because the challenge you are facing is a kind of multi-domain, multinational, and hybrid of on and offline operation. And to cope with this type of challenge, we have to involve every agency domestically and also every possible countries internationally. And domestically, it should be so interagency effort, as Priscilla said, big tent of all government agencies, and it should be led by a player within each domestic jurisdiction which has real power to lead. Because we should involve intelligence, law enforcement, military, commercial. So to lead that type of interagency big tent, you need a coordinator whom everybody sees as having real power. With the mandate given from by the top leadership. If it is presidential system, it should come from president's office. If it is prime minister cabinet system, then prime minister's office should take a lead. But that will allow every agency to be led by that type of coordinator.
And Dr. Kim, the same question to you. In your South Korean perspective and your experience working on the national security strategy and advising political leaders, who takes the lead and who do you think should be taking the lead, if not intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and so on?
So right now, our president's office has a cybersecurity coordinator, so he will lead. And he is from the intel services, but he is working with this kind of experience more than 30 years. And he is, the position itself can lead the work, as the Professor Kim said, because the law enforcement in Korea, their national police, they are good at dealing with the cybercrime again also. And the National Intelligence Services has the national cybersecurity centers in Korea, so they are involving those kind of activities more than 20 or 30 years. So they have experiences. And so they both of them are very good at dealing with the activity itself, but the leadership itself, the decision making can be delivered by one line, and then they need some kind of leadership in working together. So the Blue House and the President's office will gonna have the leadership in these cases. So I can say the higher leadership can lead the effort, then we were gonna have more fruits. But before that, and for Korean cases, it is not very common to share the whole information with the private sector very directly. So these days, the National Cybersecurity Centers are trying to have, they established a cooperation centers, including all the private sectors and some other agencies or the foreign partners at the same time. So those kind of cooperation center can be the best place to do something together.
I think it's a really important point. And the next question I have is going to focus on the private sector and sort of bringing them in a little further. But Nick, I wanted to maybe rephrase the question a little bit. Are there important actors on the government end do you think may be left out or need to be brought in to the fold a little bit more than they are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as a former FBI person, right, I might be kind of a chauvinist. But honestly, I don't think there is a single answer to this question, right? Like, you need the capabilities and authorities of every one of these agencies, and they need to be functioning together seamlessly, right? And that's not what happens. I think, if we really were serious about this problem, we should actually kind of look back to the first Bush administration and the Korea Study Group, which was hosted at the State Department, but brought together people from the interagency and made them work together. And it was a small, focused team, and they had a handful of targets that they looked at, including Banco Delta Asia, right, which ultimately was a highly impactful investigation and action. I think the same thing, right? Like, you look at OFAC, right, and the authorities that they have, especially the strict liability standard, which I think for everybody tracing these flows of funds coming out of like the Harmony hack, seeing them being dumped at OTC brokers, I would love to go and seize the OTC brokers' addresses and force them to explain why they have this money, which you can do with OFAC's authorities. The FBI, though, so OFAC lacks, though, the depth of investigative experience, right? They don't have enough people. It's a tiny agency. The FBI has lots of people, right? Incredible depth, but the framework they operate under is the legal one, right? Where when you seize money, you have to forfeit it, right? Which means you have to write a very lengthy affidavit with extremely, detailed research. It's too time intensive. It's not good enough for this kind of operation. And then you have intelligence agencies, like U.S. agencies and the NIS, who have extraordinary insight into the people and personalities, right? But typically aren't oriented towards action. They're very much focused on passive observation and intel collection. But I think, yeah, if we could really, make a push on this, it would be to have a very small, very focused team using all these authorities, with clear directives and a handful of targets, and go after them. And I would nominate, if anybody saw the Financial Times expose a couple weeks ago, which in part was co-authored by a former Belfer Center fellow here, Aaron Arnold, the organization, that is in Southeast Asia, centered on the triads and the 14K in particular, associated with Sun City, this enormous gambling operation. These are the people that laundered the Bank of Bangladesh money, right? And they're the people who are supplying the petroleum that North Korea is busting the UN sanctions with right now. My God, how have we not dismantled, these Chinese organized criminal syndicates? That would be my first target. Go after those guys.
It's a really, really interesting point. John, I want to hear your thoughts on the same question in terms of government and who should be taking the lead on these issues.
Sure. So, Alex, as a Russian speaker and the work that you've done looking at Russian-speaking organized crime, I think because of what Nick said, you have to learn Mandarin now and go after the triads. Cantonese, there you go. Which is only 9 dialects, 9 sort of components there. It's not that difficult. I do think there's an opportunity, and I'm not doing this to be, on purpose, try to force a positive aspect. In testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, looking at North Korea policy, after my testimony, I was approached by members of the committee who came from states in the middle of America and representing districts like Kansas City and others. They were mentioning that they have small businesses in their district where they're the victims of ransomware, different types of incursions with cyber means. And so I do think there's an opportunity in working with organizations like National Association of Mayors, National Governors Association. And something that we're trying to do on an early stage is to engage with the Bloomberg Harvard Mayors Initiative, which is joint between the Kennedy School and the Business School. And here, law enforcement. And I think what we've heard from Ashley and Priscilla in terms of how law enforcement naturally facilitates the sharing of information. That, I think, is something that we can frame as an opportunity. And I would conclude by saying there's also an opportunity to learn. And here, with these victims, really, at the small business level, looking at the practices, the partners, and the pathways that North Korean cyber criminals are employing to scale up these type of activities, I think there's another opportunity in this iterative game of learning as they get better, as we can get better as well.
It's a really interesting point. I don't think you often hear about mayors and state-level government on panels like this that are focusing on international cyber issues and sanctions evasion. So it'll certainly be a point of focus for us going forward in terms of building out those connections and relationships. I think we've gotten a ton of good insights on the government side, on the public side. I want to transition to the private side in particular. And Dr. Kim, I'll start with you on this question. Since last year's summit, regulators have been paying a lot more attention to crypto and to Web3. And as Director Gacki mentioned just a week ago, Treasury put out its 2023 DeFi illicit finance risk assessment, which is the first of its kind by any government, and which named North Korean cybercriminals as one of the primary malign actors in this space. It's a major new focus, and I think if I had used those words 5 years ago, you all would have looked at me like I was from Mars or something like that, the DeFi and Web3 and things like that. So we're still building competency in this area. But so I wanted to ask, starting with Dr. Kim, how effective have these preliminary regulation efforts been? And what unintended consequences do you see resulting from these actions that could in practice aid DPRK cybercriminals, like offshoring, for example?
Actually, very frankly speaking, in Korea, there's no such regulation yet. So they are start to talk about having those kind of regulations in DeFi environments. So I cannot say what can be the best one or what can be the consequences of that. So I cannot say that one right now, but it encourages policymakers to think about how we can regulate the environment and ecosystems. So right now we are expecting something gonna happen. But generally speaking, when we deal with the cybersecurity in general, I'm not good a fan of the compliance actually. So if we put a lot of compliances, then the private sectors or the other organizations are trying to follow up. But even if they fully followed up all the compliances, there's some chances to have breach it or having some attacks from outside. So the compliance cannot guarantee the 100% of that one. So I suggested to our policymakers to think of not only the compliances, but how we can raise the awarenesses and the resiliences and the hygiene concepts into their private daily activities. That will be better for them to not just rely on the compliances, but also doing some actions by themselves with some responsibilities.
And do you see the process of building out those kinds of behaviors as collaborative between government and the private sector, or do you see it more as government imposing regulation onto the private sector?
Actually, last month there's some formation of a government and private and academia at the same time whole of nation approaches forum kind of. So the leading experts, the Professor Im Jong-in is lead the forum and to talk about the government and the private sector and also the legislators and the other regulators. So it will be whole of nations kind of, not just directing in one way things.
John, if we could go to you next. On this question of regulation and unintended consequences, based on your research, what do you think in terms of the preliminary regulatory efforts and unintended consequences?
So there's an effort underway in terms of regulating some of the American crypto exchanges. And within that industry, having met with some of them in Silicon Valley recently, they're very concerned because for some of those players, they already see a pattern where their colleagues are going offshore. And in going offshore, there's always a plus and minus to everything. But on a net assessment, we lose an opportunity in terms of what they're seeing and what they're doing. There's that piece of it. Yet there is an opportunity in terms of constraining the space in which the cyber criminals operate. And regulation and regulatory tools are an important piece of it. And so I do think it's going to be a part of applying regulation, seeing what the intended, unintended consequences are, and then trying to figure out how to refine, deploy in other spaces. But for those who are researching this area as well, there's a lot of great work to be done in terms of under that, defining the problem, defining the opportunity. How do you constrain the space in which cyber criminals operate? This is going to be a part of our research agenda as well going forward.
Certainly. And Nick, the same question to you, your thoughts on balancing the sort of light touch that we were talking about before, the regulation versus taking a step back.
Yeah, no, I mean, John's point, right, about offshoring or simply shuttering operations like Binance.us was just announced they're going to shut that down. There's a real concern, that this industry will kind of escape the jurisdictional authority of the United States. But I also worry about it becoming, it's interesting, right? I think we're trying to normalize crypto, right? Make it more like traditional finance. And that is a nightmare scenario to me because the industry is really remarkably self-regulated, at least in terms of centralized exchanges. And when you're investigating one of these hacks, if you are a duly sworn law enforcement officers, most of these exchanges, no matter their jurisdiction, are going to provide records to you, which from my old days of doing a lot of trade-based money laundering investigations, that is not the way it is in traditional finance. And you simply cannot investigate these crimes, pursuing mutual legal assistance treaty requests, taking a year to get something back. That's just not practical. And so I fear that we get too far down the road that people fully insulate themselves, that laws are passed that mimic the Bank Secrecy Act or other banking secrecy laws overseas, and these crimes become essentially impossible to investigate.
Professor Kim, I'd like to bring you in on this as well. In your experience at the UN, what were challenges that you faced in terms of developing cooperation with the private sector in dealing with these kinds of important international and security issues?
It's a big challenge because, of course, whenever new regulations are introduced, we have to also think about balloon effect. They will find a way to get around the problems by offshoring, as one example. So, when we think about regulations, we have to also make it, as I borrow the term on sanctions, make it smart, thinking ahead of that kind of balloon effect as well. And when we at the UN, of course, it is almost impossible to come up with any norm on cybersecurity because some countries see the highest value in the discourse on cybersecurity should be state control, state security, and others like us and US believe highest priority should be on preserving privacy and freedom of expression. So there is no way we can agree on the terminology. And even we cannot define what constitutes cyber crimes. Because to some countries, they don't think it's a crime. So we have to find a way to get around that problem, to come up with a consensus on what should be the lowest common denominator of international law, which should be applied to GG norms we pursued until 7 years ago. So the norm we have, we agreed, is the really basic of the basic, very low common denominator. And with that, I think private sector will be confused. And also private sector, I notice, particularly the industry to be hit by cyber attacks has a tendency to under-disclose, to suppress the information, to suppress to the public because they are worried about their credibility, reputation risks, and maybe bank run or some kind of run may happen. So I think it also works to the benefit of perpetrators. So how we can persuade private sector to disclose will work in their long-term benefit. I think is one of the very difficult challenges we have to overcome. I mean, I think the same goes for Korea too.
Ashley, same question to you on unintended consequences for the private sector of regulation.
I think that's actually phenomenal. Two things are going to happen unintended consequence-wise. They're going to get attacked so much, and just because of weak cybersecurity infrastructure or creative threat actor responses to regulation, they're going to be a lot more reticent to play the game. And then further, if they can't keep up with the regulations, it's exhausting after a while. So if the goal then is to shut down the cryptocurrency ecosystem, congratulations, you're there. You've knocked out all the small players or future contenders, if you want to view it that way. Further, should the growing business that is compliant and is doing their best to keep up with the threat actor space and prevent illicit activity, that forces the actors to be creative. So they're going to find a way around that. A prime example was when OFAC sanctioned Tornado Cash. There were a lot of efforts to not accept transactions from Tornado Cash. So that's great. They blocked the cryptocurrency. And what DPRK did was add in an intermediary hop to combat that. So super simple, one-step process absolutely eliminated all of the efficacy of sanctioning Tornado Cash. So threat actors are going to get more creative. And beyond that, you may knock some players out of the game.
There are a lot of really excellent points in there, and I have about 15 questions that I'd like to ask. But we'll have time for one more question just for the panel, and then we'll open up the Q&A for the audience. So if folks in a minute want to start lining up, we have the microphone, or we will have a microphone over there in just a minute. In terms of bilateral cooperation between the U.S. and the ROK, I wonder, first of all, what are effective actions that the U.S. and South Korea can take in terms of curbing North Korean cybercriminal operations? And second of all, what are challenges to building out that cooperation?
Two, also, not be redundant, education is the foundation of all of this, right? You can raise that baseline, that's one thing, but I'll call it out like it is, and guilty in a past life, the information sharing could be a lot better, both in the public sector, of course, but in the private sector too. And to your point from earlier, you oftentimes have talking heads that take on these roles where they are really collaborative and it's great to work with them at the tail end of their career. And sometimes their replacement doesn't always hit the ground running just as fast. So there's a gap in knowledge sharing and communication there too. So if information sharing got a lot better, I think we would move a lot faster. So educate yourselves and please, where possible, talk amongst yourselves.
Professor Kim, the same question to you on opportunities and challenges for building this bilateral cooperation.
I absolutely agree with my two previous speakers. And on top of big tent with US and Korea as the base, internationally, I want to build a coalition in a form of concentric circles. US, South Korea as the inner core, and bring maybe Japan, then bring Canada as technology quad. Maybe we can call North Pacific quad, something like that. And then we can bring Australia, India, two members of already existing quad. And we can bring ASEAN as part of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And then also European partners. So I think we can build these type of concentric circles to build big tent, not only connecting local to national, but also national to global.
Certainly. I think the emphasis on the international coalition building that you've made over the course of a couple of your answers, it seems like that's a crucial component. Dr. Kim, same question to you. Opportunities and challenges for building the bilateral cooperation.
Okay, local to national, national to global, and then we will do something together. And before that, when I first met Nick last year, he asked me about who is the responsible entities in Korea of what he is doing. So actually, US and ROK doesn't understand very well. So for me, it is very hard to find the exact counterpart to talk each other. So we go together up and there, but still we need to understand what's going on and what is the system of each nation to understand better. Then we can cooperate very fluently, very in practical way. So maybe understanding the systems of each nation will be better to start up. And also, I think we have to take care of the not only the government actors, but the private sectors and also the academias. So frankly, actually, in cybersecurity area, we don't have a track to between US and ROK. So if we have those kind of understanding schemas, then we will be a little bit frank in there, and we can think or study together about the same questions. Then we can have some same understanding, and we can have some same goal, and we can make our way of working together as the similar toward the same visions. So those kind of cooperations among the academia and private sector, including the track to people, that will be very helpful. Maybe through that cooperation, then we can have kind of, for example, joint threat assessment and then we would see how we can provide a evidence-based materials for the policymakers. That will be very crucial cooperation point, I guess.
It's a great suggestion. I think just building out those relationships and contacts, it seems so important. Nick, same question to you on the challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, so first thing that I would say is I am flabbergasted by the actions that the Koreans especially have been taking in the last year with the new administration to try to bolster cooperation on these issues. I was able to participate in a conference in Seoul last year that was held by the MFA and the State Department, bringing together industry and government agencies and representatives working these issues. That never used to happen, right? That's very new. So I think a lot of progress is being made. But to the point of the prior discussion about this ideal enforcement agency, to me, it's always the knowledge and depth of knowledge that the Koreans have on this target, right? That South Korea has of North Korea. Because no matter how you cut this is a fourth or fifth tier issue for the United States. This is the issue for South Korea, right? And to take that knowledge on the targets, right, of these illicit networks that are out there facilitating this trade, because it's all interconnected, right? And to implement that and use that to further prosecute even a cyber crypto hacking case, you have to synthesize that knowledge, right, that experience. And so if we could do anything, it would be, and I always have a micro focus, right, is just do a couple of meaningful joint cases where you can build the rhythm, right, and you can get that, I hate to say this word unironically, synergy, to actually get something done. That, small steps, big things have small beginnings.
Definitely. And John, over to you for the last word before we go to the Q&A.
So Alex, as our lead researcher at the Harvard Kennedy School, in addition to learning Cantonese, you now have to learn Korean. So we'll budget that for you. So again, I revisit the goal. If on this question we define the goal, a common goal, constraining the operating space of cyber criminals, first acknowledging that cyber criminals, it's really agnostic about country. They just happen to be, in this instance, North Korean cyber criminals. As we've discussed on this panel, there are American cyber criminals, there are Australian cyber criminals, Canadian cyber criminals, South Korean cyber criminals. So the threat surface is huge. But if we do view it as a marketplace problem, then I do think we can then translate it in terms of exploring marketplace solutions. So the two things I wanted to bring to the attention of this audience, particularly for the students who are looking to do more research in the space, come join us. Number one is moral hazard, and how do we address moral hazard? If you look at the marketplace, venture capital firms, in dealing with their portfolio companies, build in that some of them will be subject to North Korean and other cyber criminals. They don't go out to get the overlays and the expenses of things like cybersecurity, hiring firms and things like that, because that eats into their margins, and these portfolio companies aren't able to meet their quarterly targets and whatnot. So how do we address that? I think that's an important thing that we need to further investigate. The second thing to think about on a positive side is how do we unleash entrepreneurialism? And the three areas, and some of the panelists mentioned here, there's a lot of great work to be done for startups in thinking about anti-fraud, identity, and the third is addressing spear phishing. These are open lanes and they're recurring in terms of doing the forensic investigation of how a particular entity, individual was hacked, spear phishing still being number one. And just quickly wrapping this up, we also have to bring into our analysis that government, just by nature, it's not to say right or wrong, this is how organizations and the cultures are focused. Government is process focused. It prioritizes the process component. In terms of the private sector, results focus, process agnostic. And so these are the elements where, going to that point about unleashing entrepreneurialism, there are a lot of good opportunities here. And finally, let me conclude with the statement that I made earlier, tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge thrives in the marketplace. And if the cyber criminals are in the marketplace, then we as researchers and as practitioners and policy people, we also need to figure out ways for us to have that immersive experience so that we can get the insights that can then inform the policy prescriptions. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So we'll transition now to our Q&A period. If you have a question, if you could stand up and approach the mic stand over here, I'll bring over the mic. And if you could state your name and your affiliation before you ask, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for a super interesting conversation. My name's Carly Winkler. I am from the Australian intelligence community. And first, can I just say on behalf of my community, sorry. No, we overclassify everything, makes everything difficult. We drive our own law enforcement people mad on the same issue. And I guess my question, and this might be a dumb question, so forgive this, but if the intelligence community were in a position to be able to work better at a lower classification level, as we would all like to be able to do, what is it that would be the most helpful? Is it attribution? Is it looking at offensive cyber, taking down infrastructure? Again, it's sort of a dumb question because it might be, what can you do? But do you have any insights about where the bang for buck would be if we could use the intelligence community better?
I think to answer your question very specifically, attribution isn't necessarily what the best thing to share is. Is that great? Yes, but we probably already knew that. I think a technical knowledge share is a lot more important and will ensure longer term success because it's not necessarily who is doing it, right? Like, we'll figure that out later. It's how they're doing it and how that's repeated by the rest of their network and their friends as well. So it's great to share the high level details of your individuals or entities of interest, but more specifically, how you came up with that and methodologies behind your work, I think are excellent to share if and when we can. And again, I'm sorry for my past life.
Thank you.
Again, as my two previous speakers said, looking forward, thinking in advance, anticipating, analyzing, I think it should be the key. Because as Nick said, if you look at the patterns, there is a gap of 1 year, 2 years from one attack to another attack, but they always sharpen their tools and make it much more sophisticated in the meantime, and boom, next attack, much larger scale, much more sophisticated. So working together to think in their shoes in anticipation of where the attack will come from, where is extremely important, because I think, as John said, maybe for now we can look at marketplace challenges, but I think we have to really seriously consider pushing it to national security challenge. Because if they acquire knowledge and know-how in the state-of-the-art technologies such as artificial intelligence and quantum computing, then what? Because cyber hacking can be the perfect weapon, as David Sanger said, but also I'm afraid it can be the ultimate weapon. Because you may create killer robots using AI to attack you. But if you are better at hacking, you can hack killer robots to attack the creator. Then you don't spend anything, but you can turn the table against them. So very soon, I'm afraid, that day may come, and we have to be prepared. And on that, we need a lot of help from the US. Nick said, there are some things South Korea can help. But on these state-of-the-art technologies, we need the US to help us catch up.
Okay, in between US and South Korea, I want to share some examples of what the Korea is doing regarding the information sharing. So actually, the National Cybersecurity Center is under the Intel services, so they are very notorious not sharing anything. So that was really true for the cybersecurity sectors too. But these days, they are trying to open it up. But not for everybody, but very targeted audiences will kind of get the information. So, for example, in critical infrastructure protection areas, is the system itself in US and Korea is totally different. So, the 90% of the CI is owned by the private sectors in US, but almost the 70 or 60% of the CI is operated or owned by the government or public sectors in Korea. So the National Cybersecurity Center has a leading role to protect the critical infrastructures. So in that cases, they made some sections or sectors to be focused on to having more detailed information for the industry, for the defense kind of, they were going to get some more detailed informations. And also there's another platform to sharing the informations with closed manner. So the industry or private sectors or the owners, operators can share their worries and their concerns. Then the answers can be done by the leading experts. And also that includes the exercise or the education itself. So it really helps them to understand what's going on and what can be really protected for themselves. So those kind of specified practical information sharing was very helpful for them.
So I've never been in Australian intelligence, so I don't know. I assume it's somewhat like America. And I think my diagnosis, right, of the problem is there's often, especially like enduring threats, right, there's a lack of focus and objective in what you're doing. You're just gathering information and then endlessly feeding it into the pipeline to questionable effect. Like, why are we even doing this? The question I would always pose to anybody working on any mission is, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what are we going to do with this information? And if you have that framework and you understand maybe what can be done, for example, my own education learning about correspondent banking and the enormous vulnerability that creates, because all of these international wire transfers actually come through US banks. But nobody in the finance missions in the intelligence community really understood that. And so there's all kinds of things that could have been done, right? There are all kinds of really meaningful, impactful disruptions that could have been made, but they weren't because people really didn't understand the purpose of what they were doing. So I would always just focus on a task objective, whatever mission you have.
Actually, good. Next question.
Sure. Next question, if you want to come up to the microphone, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Sinap Fun. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I'm from Germany and currently a visiting research fellow at Harvard. My question is concerning the connections between North Korea and Russia. Do you notice any suspicious, any troubling transformation since the outbreak of the Ukraine war? Thank you so much.
So if I could turn it to the moderator, Alex. So over to you, Alex.
John, will you pass the mic down?
Thanks. Well, I would just say that in the course of our research at the Korea Project, we've noticed that it's not always the Russian state, although that is involved to a certain extent. Priscilla mentioned before that the way that North Korea plugs into the global internet is it really comes down to a few cables in China and in Russia. And there's a Russian state company called Trans Telecom, TTK, that provides a major element of that connection. And in the contract that the North Korean state agency and the Russian company signed, it says that if this connection is used for spam, for hacking, for criminal purposes, then we can terminate the connection at any time. And the reason that connection hasn't been terminated is not because the Russians haven't noticed that it's being used for those kinds of purposes. Of course, that they're sort of willingly abiding and allowing that to happen. But I think it's even more so criminal groups and cyber criminal groups in Russia, as well as money launderers who are aiding and abetting in these North Korean activities. And it's not necessarily that they're seeking out North Korean partners. It's often, like John said before, they're kind of agnostic when it comes to who the targets are or who they work with. I would mention, too, that in the Russian context, there's not so much of a stigma about working with North Koreans. Like, if you ask any American business, would you do business with this North Korean trading company? The answer is probably, or we would hope, is of course not. It should be. Maybe it isn't always, but it should be. But in Russia, not only is there not that sort of gut reaction, but on the contrary, folks that we've interviewed in Russia, including after the war broke out, say that there's a sense of sort of camaraderie, a sense of sort of we're in this together. We're both being sanctioned heavily by the U.S. And so it's not necessarily active partnership and saying, oh, we're friends, but it's almost the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so working on it together.
I won't speak specifically to the time post-war, but I think it's also important to recognize that, yes, while you're all getting shut out of the global financial system, they're running out of options. So it's kind of a last man standing kind of thing, right, where hopefully no U.S. business or perhaps individual looking to facilitate illicit activity will work in North Korea. However, it's in terms of proximity close. And also important to note is that Russian and Chinese illicit actors can provide the liquidity that North Korea needs. So whereas they may have success in other places, you follow the money, you go where the money is.
So I wanted to turn it from the angle of OFAC and Treasury. It's interesting as we see the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the unleashing of U.S. economic statecraft on different sectors of Russia. Unique opportunities to leverage those to essentially target North Korean entities that are doing business with the Russians as well. So that was one of the silver linings, I thought. And so from an OFAC perspective and what Treasury is doing overall with the economic statecraft component, there are some interesting opportunities. So I think it is a function of the larger game plan as we find these opportunities, how to look at some of the North Korean targets from a different angle.
Frederick Kading. I'm a PhD student in computer science, focusing on cybersecurity and ethical hacking. You mentioned this to some degree, but I would like to hear more about which new cybersecurity tools and research areas would you like to see a focus in to mitigate the kind of problems we have discussed today.
Thanks for that question. One of the interesting things, one of the great things about the Kennedy School, there is a growth of joint degree students. So these are students who are dividing their time between Kennedy School and Harvard Business School. Many of them are already in Silicon Valley. A lot of them are military veterans. And so they're naturally inclined. They're mission-driven, intellectually curious, and now looking to apply that in terms of startups. And so the three areas that I looked at, that I mentioned, anti-fraud, identity, and spear phishing, we have alums who are working in that space right now. And so from the researcher perspective, there's a lot of work to be done from not looking at the marketplace, but going inside of the marketplace. So interviewing market participants and understanding from their perspective, and nothing illicit, but how they engage in their practices, partners, and pathways, then doing the same methodology for the cyber criminals and some of the things that we're able to gather as well. But it is this unleashing of entrepreneurialism is really fascinating. If you approach it from regulation, is behavioral economics. Entities are going to do 50 plus 0.001%. They're inclined to do that. If you unleash entrepreneurialism, they'll do the hackathons, they'll look at ways to be creative, and the whole notion that the first to get there, likely to get the next round of funding. To me, that's the unleashing component of creativity that we really need to scale up on.
Thanks.
Yeah, so there's one thing here that I think, and how do I phrase this? I'm a bit of an outlier, maybe a little bit overly aggressive. But I actually think the future of this is going to look a lot like the past, and like very far in the past, of piracy. Because there's, like, we look at North Korea and this activity, right? This is essentially the modern version of state piracy. This is the Barbary pirates of the early, late 18th, early 19th centuries. And I think the answer is going to look the same, and it's going to be privateering. Because you have this bizarre scenario, right, where North Korea, this incredibly backward country, technologically underdeveloped, is yet somehow this extraordinary performer in this one realm, right? Because there is a profit incentive here, right? This is essentially the market at work, but in North Korea. Meanwhile, the United States and our allies are all very Stalinistic, right? We are pursuing this as a government response mechanism, and the government simply doesn't have the skills to go after these guys, right? Everything we're talking about is defensive. This is all after-the-fact responses. But I think, and it's in the U.S. Constitution, actually, so there's not even legislation needed. Letters of marque and reprisal and privateering is the future of this problem. That you give authority to specific individuals with specific skill sets, and you tell them it's open season, hunt them down, take back their money, and you get to keep what you take back, by the way. That's the principle of privateering. I think that's going to be, it's going to be 10 years or 20 years, but that's where we're going to end up.
Sounds good.
Maybe I can not share, suggest any subject which can you do better with the collaborations, but maybe I can put my wishes to you that please be understandable for the policymakers. So whatever you can do, please let them understand what you can do, and then let them use that one, utilize that. Then the policymaking processes will be fertilized, and then we will have more options to do. So please be them.
Short answer, using from UN jargon, 3 Ps: prevention, preparedness, punishment. So we need to sharpen every tool kit possible along these 3 lines.
If I may ask, what are you studying specifically? Have you decided yet?
I do study ethical hacking against critical societal functions. So that's pretty much what you talk about.
Perfect.
But I don't have a green light to hack North Korea yet.
That was my next question, but I do have a follow-up. Prevention and detection are two things that we always wish we had, right? In the decentralized finance space, smart contract audits don't always work, but the biggest barrier is that it takes forever as a DeFi protocol to get audited because so few individuals and groups know how to do that with some degree of certainty that they'll been backed by cyber insurance. So, the insurance industry aside, that's not your problem to figure out. However, if there was a fail-safe mechanism to smart contracts, maybe that's an area for improvement where, it levels the playing space where you can get into this space. You have to be innovative and creative on top of that. But if you do this set of things, you're not necessarily as vulnerable as you could be on your own.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for one more quick question. Sure.
Hi, my name's Wayne, and I'm the prosecutor from Taiwan, and I'm now an affiliate in the Berkman Klein Center. And since the cryptocurrency-related crime is really serious in Taiwan and even here, so and also according to the blockchain, just as Ashley said, every transaction can be traceable. So since that, what do you think about the trend of the cryptocurrency crime? Will go up or go down, and why? Thank you.
I have an answer you're not going to like. Crime makes up such a fraction of a percent of all of blockchain activity. And as more people buy in and participate in the space, the percentage is also still going to decrease. So I'm not saying that criminals can't keep up with the adoption rate, but it's less likely. Now, everything is transparent on the blockchain and it can be traced, right? Okay, but there is a fiat on-ramp and a fiat off-ramp most of the time. Now, we haven't yet seen, with definitive proof at least, a full ecosystem run on cryptocurrency in terms of, you don't have GDP on the blockchain, at least today, that we can prove. But there is a fiat on-ramp and off-ramp too, so there are a lot of opportunities for getting caught, which does keep me employed, by the way, so thank you.
Yeah, so I think, as a warning, right, to anybody out there contemplating this, is this is immutable, right? This is always going to be there. This is not like a normal crime where you get away with it and the evidence disappears and you're scot-free. Every day, like our companies are developing new techniques to figure these things out. We will find you. Absolutely, right? I mean, if you actually think, right, that, say, something like Samurai Wallet is going to stand up to quantum computing, you're a fool. And so unless you're a North Korean, essentially, right, who fears no consequence because you are secure in Pyongyang, you are a moron to try to hack these protocols and actually use this money. And that's when you look at the Bitfinex case, right, which forever people are like, this has to be Russians, this has to be North Koreans. It turned out to be two very ordinary people. And they were caught mainly because they spent a small amount in a Walmart gift card. That's just how this is. And it's going to get, very much harder to actually benefit from your crimes. So please don't do it.
Well, actually, last month we have conversations back in Korea, and the law enforcement is worried about the real criminals are not cashing out that one. That they are bullying the other victims to cashing out the cryptic monies, and then they were gonna get the cashes from the victims. So that will be another problem. So maybe there's some chance that to be caught.
Yes.
From very general economic perspective, we have to expect a digital economy to continue to grow. So we have to also assume the number of illicit activities to grow as well. That's the simple answer.
So, ending on a positive note. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
So unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time for today's panel. I want to say another huge thank you to all the panelists for the really great, if we could have a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you all so much. Big thanks to our audience for joining today, and I'll hand it back to John.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Alex, and thank you very much for our panel here. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our closing remarks speaker. If I could ask the panel members to remain seated here. So for our closing remarks, I'd like to introduce Consul General Kijun, who has been a wonderful friend and partner in growing Korean security studies during his time with us. And so with this, something to know about Consul General Yu is that he leads the Consulate General here in Boston, and previously in Korea, he was a Director General for International Legal Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So in a number of our meetings and whatnot, he lent a lot of his expertise in this space. In the fall, we had a conference with the Korean Maritime Institute. So it was really good to engage on that front as well. If I could invite you to the podium. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed for the kind introduction. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad to have this chance to offer a few reflections at the close of the fourth annual Harvard Korean Security Summit. It has been an honor and a privilege for me to be a part of this summit. It has brought us together to reflect on a theme of real interest, Korea, an oracle of global trends. Our deep thanks go to the Korea Foundation and the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs for arranging this meaningful occasion. It is with the benefit of all their hard work and efforts that this event has come to fruition. I have been particularly looking forward to this gathering for the following reasons. First, this is the first face-to-face annual Harvard Korean Security Summit since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, the meaningful announcement during this summit by Mr. Kim Ki-hwan, President of the Korea Foundation, Mr. Eric Rosenberg, Co-Director of Belfer Center, and Professor Nicholas Harkness, Director of the Korea Institute, regarding the formal establishment of a new endowment fund for the Korea project. I believe that our meticulously arranged summit has proved perfectly timed. We are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the ROK-US alliance at this juncture. Some 7 decades ago, ROK-US alliance was forged in blood. It has long served as the very linchpin for peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula, and indeed in the Indo-Pacific region. It has evolved into a global, comprehensive, strategic alliance, an alliance which spans many dimensions. It is my sincere belief that the alliance today stands stronger than ever. In fact, as we mark this milestone, President Yoon will make a state visit to the US later this month. During this summit, all the topics touched upon have been truly thought-provoking, and the dynamic discussions have served to deepen our understanding of the increasing control of critical technologies. This at the time when the need for robust export control is recognized to be more strategically critical than at any time since the end of the Cold War. And they have as well shared valuable light on practical aspects of North Korea's revenue generation from crypto theft, and indeed, the need for the international community to curb it. In conclusion, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our keynote speakers, moderators, and panelists for their wonderful contribution. It is not every day that one gets to have top researchers on Korean security issues, senior ROK and US practitioners, and next generation scholars together at the same time and place. It seems there are a range of possible scenarios that have the potential to unfold down the road. Their input has been invaluable, and without doubt, their insights have served to make this event a great success. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
So in a final wrap-up, everything Consul General you said I agree with. Very eloquent comments, and thank you so much for that. To wrap for the 4th Korean Security Summit here at Harvard, I would also like to echo thanks to the Korea Foundation, a tremendous partner in growing Korean security studies here, a very momentous occasion with this trip. And also our deep thanks to you, the audience members. Over the past 3 days, you've really helped to grow the community here. And I think what you see here is something that is truly the beginning. We have an opportunity to work with many of you as student researchers, as some of our doctoral fellows and some of our faculty members looking at Korea as this laboratory, as these functional issues play out so quickly. There is so much good research to be done. And finally, I would like to just give a little preview for next year. As the world changes, we're very excited because we don't know what kind of topics we'll be covering for the 5th Korean Security Summit. But there is one thing that I can guarantee is that with our researchers and the types of individuals that you've seen over the past 3 days, it's going to be a very exciting set of chapters that will unfold. So thank you again for joining, and wonderful, and we'll look forward to see you next year as well. Thank you.